A word to the wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes, as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us. That would be through chapter 13 up until the end of part 1 of Brandon Sanderson's The Hero of Ages, the third installment in the Mistborn trilogy.
Hey there, this is Cross.
And I'm PJ.
And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should think of us as your intoxicating weekly book club.
Maybe a little less intoxicating today. I don't know.
Previously intoxicating. Yeah.
This is your hangover podcast where Crosslin and I drink water, tea, and Gatorade.
As a note for anyone at home, we aren't going to have a drink segment this week. I mean, I guess we'll talk about what we're drinking, but PJ kind of gave away the goat there. Not that there is any goat to get. We drank too much last night playing games with our patrons, of which was an absolute blast. Playing Jackbox and Codenames with a bunch of patrons, and
you're in the bartender or above tier for our Patreon. You can join us once a month playing games. Drinking too much, and
don't usually drink too much. It was just
giving us hangovers.
I think it was the shot that Bingham asked me to do that really pushed me over. I think I was doing.
It was everything, Crossland. It was everything.
I mean, the other thing to consider is like Manhattans sneak up on me. I found in the Bourne episode that comes out tomorrow. That also it snuck up on me. I was not blasted or anything, but I was like, ooh, I am more drunk than I thought I was. Yeah. So that's what happens though when your drink is 3 ounces of alcohol with nothing else. that'll do it.
A leftover. I guess we can talk about what we drank yesterday.
Yeah. Before we do that, I just want to shout into the episode. Today is our second episode discussing The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson, and we are going to chat about chapters 6 through 13. What were you going to talk about with what you drank yesterday?
A couple months ago in March, for Kaylin's birthday, we did a tiki party because what else? What else are we going to do? We dressed up with Hawaiian shirts and drank punch. And at the end of the night, there was a lot of extra punch. And we mixed them both together, threw it in the freezer. So it's been frozen for a couple months. And then we wanted more freezer space. So I took it out and thawed it and put it into some mason jars. And I had some of that. It was pretty strong to begin with, but I was adding more rum. So it was a nice, refreshing, rummy punch, mystery punch. And I had 32 ounces of it.
Oh, that'll do.
Not quite. It was this jar, but it was like that full. It was probably like, I don't know, 25 ounces or something. Yeah, that was probably a good 4 or 5 drinks worth.
Yeah, we were pleasantly toasted. We had originally planned on ending around like 10:30 or whatever, and we went until...
Yeah. But it was worth it. It was a lot of fun.
But it was worth it. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, we appreciate everyone who came out for that. And like PJ said, hop in at the bartender tier and you can join us and understand our pain. Like I said, usually we don't drink that much, but man, we went for a long time. We had a good time. So to that point, I'm having water and tea today. So
yep. I'm having water and Gatorade Glacier Cherry Frost.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I like most of the Frost. I do like the Glacier Cherry.
Yeah.
Cool. So before we talk about the chapters, how do you feel about this week's reading, PJ? What you thinking? What you feeling? What's the vibe check?
I love this book. I really love this story. There are a lot more questions, and you are basically just laughing at me when I ask you things and not answering.
Kind of true. That literally happened today.
So
PJ sent me a text, and I sent an emoji back.
And that didn't say anything else. So clearly it is going to have a good payoff, but without knowing that, it feels like plot holes. But I trust Mr. Branderson. So
yeah. The fun thing in doing this reread in particular has been tracing back a lot of these lines with you. And like, you know, I get I have the foresight of the end, in this pass. So I, obviously have all that, and I can layer it on and be like, oh, there's more. Oh, I saw that. Oh, that's okay. There's a lot of that going on.
A lot of mouth noises coming from you in that sentence.
True. I think what's so it's difficult because this book is this series is a masterclass in like execution from a like net perspective, but we aren't there yet. So like I can't at the same time, be like, yep. And I'm not going to say any more than that about it, but I will say that this is the section that kind of like we went over last week, I had a tough time with the first 60 pages of this book when I read it the first time. I was like, there's a lot that I don't like here. And this second half colors so much of that first half. And by that, I mean the first, this half of the part. I was
struggling, honestly, that first section that you had me read. Struggling a little bit.
And I don't, and we tend not to be, we've only complained about 2 books, and it's always like really complained, I should say. And it's been the first 60 pages basically of both books between Red Rising and this one. And the reality is that in a reread, it is good, but in siloed context, it stings a little bit in weird, funky ways. Mm-hmm. And to make you stop as well, and to have stopped myself, is frustrating because it is, it does get so much better on the other side. The grass is greener.
Very much so.
Wanted to get that out of the way just because of how much Elend bashing I did last episode on the top end. I'm just, I'm reeling, waiting for the inbox to explode with people being frustrated with my Elend takes. So
yeah, we'll see if that happens.
Yeah, I did tone it down, and we launched a giveaway. So I'm sure that, assuaged some things in the long run.
That's still going to be going
I'm
when this comes out, right?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of important to mention. Check it out on Facebook and Instagram. We have a giveaway going on. All it requires tagging a couple of friends, letting them know we're giving away a copy of Elantris by Brandon Sanderson.
Right?
A leatherbound copy of Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. It is an unsigned copy, just kind of like the Mistborn one is, but it is nonetheless one of the leatherbounds. And part of the reason that we're doing that is we wanted to do another giveaway for the show, of course, and the other leatherbounds were sold out within the Mistborn series. But also this month on the Short Pour, we are going to be covering and talking about Elantris. So it also lines up basically with the release of that episode. So it felt like a good way to kind of celebrate our quote year, 2 years of Sanderson quote. So, yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So go enter. If you're a patron, you are already entered. So thank you.
Yeah.
All right. With that, let's get into the chapters. We start off here with chapter 6, which is a very short chapter. It's one that I had considered tagging into last week, but I really liked beginning and ending this section with Marsh and kind of showing some Marsh trajectory and path here. But yeah, it's really short, and Marsh is absolutely not in control of himself and is noting a lot of things to us, potentially as a vessel of ruin, and he's kind of commenting on the beauty of the ash falling when he's controlled by ruin, of which we see that kind of ebb and flow even in his perspective. It's so interesting to me because it's not an unreliable narrator, but it has almost the tenuous hand of a character that is kind of an unreliable narrator. You know what I mean? Everything that he's saying is real, but we can see the taint on his perspective when Rune's there.
Right.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah, I guess we get more of this in his second chapter, but there's the comments on some of the powers that were held back from the Inquisitors by the Lord Ruler. And I feel like that is a really nice, clever way to maintain the power structure between our heroes and these antagonistic Inquisitors, keeping them sort of in line with each other. But as always, poor Marsh.
Yeah. It is definitely poor Marsh. That's a great point on the side of the power level kind of scaling, because it did seem like Vin could just manhandle Inquisitors, and even Vin and Elend taking out the one at the beginning of the story was fairly, insignificant, it seemed, as far as the threat goes. So it is, I agree with you, it's definitely a nice little tune-up that they get.
Right.
Yeah. Cool.
Without being like canon breaking,
Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's the whole like pounding of spikes thing is also fascinating, right? Like the whole, all the additional spikes, and obviously I guess I shouldn't say obviously. It seems obvious that there's something going on with this. This is an example of him, which is said a couple of times as well by Marsh, that, you know, that's kind of what they're going through, and that he's driven some spikes himself and things like that. Did you have any other thoughts on spikes or hemalurgy after this week's Marsh ratings?
Nothing new specifically in regards to Marsh or the Inquisitors, other than the fact that he's got a bunch of them. But there is the question that that'll bring up during one of Tensoon's chapters, which is the blessings and how they might be directly related to hemalurgy.
Okay. So. All right. We'll definitely talk about that in, just a little bit here. Cool. So with that, we move into chapter 7. We have a logbook chapter here, of course, at the beginning of the entry. Also, I think for the record, the audiobook actually works in this one properly on Audible and everything else. I think that it sections off the chapters now with the headers accompanied through Audible. So, there's not that bleed over listen. They do still announce the chapter after it's done reading, but the marker wouldn't will flip over to the next chapter. Anyway, point being, easier to find, easier to listen to. We're still going to follow the same format, though, because we've followed that the whole time. So, kind of always ending on a logbook, except for when it ends evenly on a part like this week. So, cool. With that, we have the logbook. I speak of us as we, the group, those of us who are trying to discover and defeat Ruin. Perhaps my thoughts are now tainted, but I like to look back and see the sum of what we were doing as a single, united assault, though we were all involved in different processes and plans. We were one. That didn't stop the world from ending, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
So there's some shit. This makes it pretty clear that this is, confirms this is someone that we already know. Sazed is still my assumption. And also that this is written very clearly in the future compared to where we are in the story right now, because the world's ended. So there's that to deal with. That's a problem, I think. But maybe actually could be. It's kind of posited here that it's not a bad thing that the world ended. Kind of purged and started new is the read I get from there. I don't know. We'll find out. Not a whole lot to take from that yet, but
yeah, not a whole lot that I can comment on here, of course. But what I will say is that your previous prediction did also paint Tindwell in that space, and that you were kind of dancing back and forth between the two. I don't want to, So I am going to turn this one into a prediction as well, and just kind of tuck it in and accompany it.
Yeah,
so
I tucked Tindwell in there. I still like the thought of resurrecting Tindwell with one of the nuggets, as they're referred to now. When they're referred to as nuggets by our narrator of the logbook, I did immediately think chicken nugget. I know. It feels like how we would disrespectively comment on the beads. I feel like beads is the more apt term that should be used, and we would call them nuggies. But turn it on its head, I guess.
Yeah. That is I am utterly blown away by the idea that it is so holistically something that we would say, and I cannot believe that it is in this book this way, because it feels like a meme that we would come up with. This is Poopin' Room. This is Poopin' Room in book form. A
little bit. But I guess when you're talking about gold nuggets and stuff, it's maybe not that far of a stretch.
Yeah. It's funny. It's silly. And I really enjoy it. So getting into the chapter, because I really like this chapter. We are again with Tensoon, and I love the Kandra chapters inside of the story. I love them so much. I love the way that this one opens from the very first line of they gave him bones, all the way to the description of how he actually forms himself, of pulling them together and stretching the muscles and kind of stitching it. It's just, for Brandon Sanderson, this is one of the most lovely descriptions of something that he's given, I think. And I mean lovely in the fascinating way, in the truly, it's a gripping description. Yeah. As he says, I really like this little bit. His body wasn't that of any specific person. He would have needed a model to produce such a replica as well. And it's that's another interesting thing that gives this kind of sovereignty over the creation of bodies too, which is fascinating, I think. I think we'll have more to talk about there.
Yeah, that is. It makes me wonder how what the process is when they're actually replicating someone, because they're obviously eating them, you know, like they're not looking at a model when they're creating their skin, because the model's gone. They've eaten the bones.
Eaten the bones.
Eat the bones.
Well, they do leave the bones behind. They do. So like when they make a body, they do extrude the bones if they want to switch bodies. Extrude.
They extrude the old bones, right?
Yeah. So like, for instance, when Tensoon switches between the dogs, he does have to get rid of those bones because they were broken. So he like steps out of them and morphs into the other ones.
Yeah, but he needs to have more bones though.
Yeah. He still needs bones for form.
Right. I guess my point is, when he's replicating an individual, he's not looking at that individual anymore.
Yeah, typically.
So I'm curious what that process is in a more refined way.
Sure.
I'm sure we'll get something more on that, but anyway, I am mostly curious about in this section is what bones they gave him, because apparently his approximation of a human based on the bones that he was given is a reasonable enough approximation of the person that those bones belong to. And it's somebody that presumably we already know based on how, or I'm assuming. It's definitely somebody that Tensoon already knows.
So correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't think I am in this circumstance, but if I remember correctly, it's the other Kandra that's making the assumption that he looks very similar to someone, like he's worn those bones before, I think is what Varcel says or whatever. And it's like, no, I haven't. I've never worn these bones. And Varcel's making that assumption because he's wearing human bones and all humans are the same.
Well, but he says these are bones of somebody that you gave us. Like these were bones given by Tensoon. So I saw it more of a just commentary on like, oh, like you recognize these bones, as opposed to just making the claim based on the fact that he creates it so well. I don't know. I guess it could go either way.
Yeah, but. So it's an assumption. I just found the little section. I think your context is correct, though, if that makes sense. He hasn't actually worn those bones before. He's just so convincingly good at transforming that the 5th generation Varcel believed that he had worn those bones before. Because he absorbed, like he knew the structure and he knew where things should go. Yeah, because Tensoon literally says, so page 65-ish, again, I'm using the Kindle. So here's how it reads. Tensoon stood. What he asked at the look in Varcel's eyes. I just picked a random set of bones from the storeroom, Varcel said. It's ironic that I would give you a set of bones that you'd originally contributed. Tensoon frowned. What? And then he made the connection. The body that Tensoon had created around the bones must look convincing, as if it were the original one that these bones had belonged. Varcel assumed that Tensoon had been able to create such a realistic approximation because he'd originally digested the human's corpse.
Gotcha.
And therefore knew how to create the right body around the bones. But he assumed.
Now I understand.
Yeah.
And also now that gives me more understanding of the question I brought up earlier. So
yeah, it points to skill. Like it points to Tensoon's genuine capability as a Kandra as well, which I think is a fun twist on top of it, because they kind of seem amorphous and like they would just all be able to have the same capabilities and qualities. And they don't. There's diversity among them. They're species just like anything else. Yeah.
Gloopy, globby species.
Yes. There's some really fun fan art of Kandra and of even some of the ones that we've already seen of like the different renditions with like wood and crystalline and, stuff like that. So it'll be fun once we get to the end to review some of those too. Thinking about the way that these form, what do you think about the true body that is captive Varcel of the 7th generation wears, or 5th generation, excuse me? Last week you were asking why can't they be X? Why couldn't they absorb X? And kind of that was a question that you'd pose, or like, could they do this? And I thought that these were really fun examples. I knew that they were coming. I didn't realize that it was coming so soon. I thought it was like another week or two out.
The description of the true bodies is way cooler than anything I could have come up with on my own.
Yeah, they're neat.
Like, it's turning bones into jewelry. It's fucking awesome.
Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. It is very much like, I mean, it's like fashion. It's like clothing, right? It's a way that they express themselves too. In addition to the way that they construct their bodies, they also like flow. Yeah, so fascinating. I like the jewelry comparison because it's definitely a choice. And that's why the 10th generation, excuse me, 10, is it the 10th?
7th.
The later generations, I think it's like 7, 8, and 10 or something like that, they say, or, you know, rebelling so much with like weird bodies like Milan and her friends, you know, the one with wood and the one, she's got like the glass, and some of the second generation have those really rigid crystalline bones. Yeah, it's cool. It's so fucking cool.
Yeah.
Not a fantasy creature that I have ever experienced before. Nothing like it even. Doppelgangers truly don't do enough justice to explaining what a Kandra is.
No.
So again, there's more wonderful world building on the part of the Kandra. Sparkling rods that Tensoon identifies as the blessings to us, the reader, and kind of more descriptions of the different generations. Like we said, this section does a great job of world building. It is a lot more. It is both simultaneously some of the most impressive flexes of Brandon Sanderson showing, and some of the most egregious tells. Because he does just kind of say things from Tensoon's perspective inside of his head to explain stuff to us that I don't think Tensoon would actually feel the need to explain, because he's lived around this for so long. So anyway, regardless, point being, what do you think of the description of the blessings and stuff?
Yeah, so I know I just mentioned it with Marsh and Hemalurgy a little bit, but did I bring this up last week to you or on the air or just in my head about like wondering where their powers came from? I can't remember. Like, I know I thought about it and I know I was like curious. I just don't remember if it was out loud, but either way, this partially answers, I feel like, that line of questioning, being that it seems like it's similar, if not the same process that the Inquisitors go through for their powers.
Totally. Yeah, I definitely think so. I think that it does seem as though there's some tendrils of connection there too, between the blessings and the rods, right? There's something there. Could be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we have had, I think, 2 blessings identified at this point. Potency and meaningly. This is why I like the Kindle blessing. This is the real reason that I bought this, is because it's really easy to search and find things as opposed to doing what we're doing. Presence was the other one.
Right.
So yeah, with those 2 blessings, you've got like an interesting picture of like, well, what the fuck is this? which is fun and interesting.
It is.
We'll have to
Can
see
you
how
have
it
multiple?
goes.
I'd assume so.
Yeah.
Why do some have them and why do others not? Is it a reward?
That was very Tom Segura of you. And it was very funny. I just have to give you props because it was funny. The chapter ends with Tensoon recounting what he has to do, convincing the first generation that he did the right thing in his betrayal. Obviously, we are literally going to go through the rest of this trial over the course of this, but, you know, yeah.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying Tensoon's perspective through and through. It's very perceptive and deliberate in all of its descriptions, and as you mentioned, maybe too much, I don't know, but I'm enjoying it, so fuck you.
Yeah. Whoops. Okay, cool. With that, we move into, I was wondering if I could say something there, but I can't, so I hee-heed out of it, which is not a thing that I'm going to make happen ever again. Never going to do it again.
You will. You'll forget.
Probably. So with that, chapter 8, moving into the next chapter here, we have our logbook, of course. It is too easy for people to characterize ruin as a simple force of destruction. Think rather of ruin as intelligent decay, not simply chaos, but a force that sought an irrational and dangerous way to break everything down to its most basic forms. Ruin could plan and carefully plot, knowing if he built one thing up, he could use it to knock down 2 others. The nature of the world is that when we create something, we often destroy something else in the process.
So this is making me really realize how much I don't understand about ruin at this point and just want to. I guess, seems more like a force of nature than an individual sentient entity, you know?
Mm-hmm. Right. It does have that perception. And it's even, I think it's all the way at the very end of this week's reading with Marsh, where he like even questions if it's just a force or a creature, like something literal, and ruin is controlling him. So that's even more interesting because he is actively being influenced by this thing and doesn't have a complete understanding. You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't even know.
And maybe that's intentional. Maybe it's an intentional way to ensure that there's more reverence for Ruin's power, to keep it kind of shadowed, even amongst the people that it's controlling.
It makes the thing seem more godlike too, you know? Like, it adds to the, like you said, the shadow, the mystique of this force creature thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that we don't really know yet. So there's a lot of really lovely language in the beginning of this book here, describing some of the scenes, really setting us firmly in the world to start off. The one that gets me are the changes in the mist and how they're behaving kind of like tendrils reaching up from the ground. And, you know, you just get this very interesting mystique of the mist, the deepness. What do you think about the mist and its newfound propensity to kill, and the mystery that surrounds the scant deaths and subsequent immunity?
So I would have thought about this as sort of a response to and function of Ruin's release, but it was already happening before that, to a lesser extent, but it was progressing. So maybe this isn't something that's controlled by Ruin, but is maybe being pushed along in its process by it, accelerated, whatever it is. I don't know. There is a comment in one of Tensoon's chapters, I think, and maybe it's during the trial, but it's relevant here, so I'm going to bring it up. And that's the other capitalized, seemingly similar entity called persistence, I think.
Preservation.
It's
in a logbook entry, so I don't feel like it's cheating because I'm going to read it in 2 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. So that seems like a balancing force, if you will. So it going along the idea of force of nature, those two would balance each other out to a certain degree. And Ruin has been released and is able to kind of tip the scale in whatever this balancing act is. Working theory, I don't know what to make of it yet. Don't know enough.
Sure.
But
okay. I mean, I think that is something that we're being kind of pointed in the direction of while reading this logbook as well, is it's going back and forth and kind of showing us the way that these two things kind of interact. And by that, I mean very vaguely. I don't mean that they actually interact. I just mean in the most vaguest of contexts, there appears to be kind of like the balance, like you were saying. Yeah. So, yeah. The perspective here, again, is interesting and shows us the power of Vin's tin. It's fascinating because she's basically watching Elend from a long distance away, using tin to pierce the mist to be able to kind of listen in on this conversation and see what's going on. But it does feel like it's a weird third-person distant perspective like we were talking about before, even though all of the thoughts are colored with Vin's thoughts. So like everything is still through Vin's perspective, and we don't get any of like Elend's internal monologue in this moment, but we do see Elend. It's predominantly like an Elend start to the chapter, but told through Vin's eyes from like maybe a half mile away. I don't know how far she is, but you know, she's sitting on a stump hanging out. Lots of stump sitting this week too.
Tin is a weird one now, again. This is what I sent you a question about, and you laughed at me in emoji form.
I did. I'm really excited to laugh at you physically right now.
I'm wondering if so there's a quote, and I know I sent it to you, so I'm going to just look at my text messages. She couldn't burn much tin lest the sunlight blind her, but without it she couldn't pierce the mists. So she is able to, it's not a binary for her. Very obviously now in this one, like it was shown a few different times in different metals, but that's not how the rules have been defined for us. So I'm wondering if that's something unique to Vin and Elend. I can't remember if, like, he seems to exhibit the same properties with his strength or with steel pushing. And so is it unique to those two? Is it unique to Mistborns in general? Is it just being able to master the craft well enough to sort of see those nuances? What it reminds me of, truly, is the way that Sazed uses his Ferrochemy, increasing my suspicion that Vin has some sort of access to that as well. Talked about that a few different times throughout the past couple books, but it's still on my mind.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So, yep.
This is literally what you texted me as a question.
Yep.
I did literally respond by saying interesting in a text message and then sending an emoji after that.
Yep.
I think you said fuck you or something like that after I said
probably.
Interesting. It was pretty good. Anyway, the point being,
I responded with that, like,
the flat emoji
the
face.
flat face emoji.
Yeah. Which is honestly one of my favorite emojis. It's so good. Anyway, why are we talking? So yeah, I really enjoy this section in particular because of kind of that perspective. And it does raise these questions again. You know, it does raise the questions of what exactly is going on with Vin, because we know that something is different about what she can do. Yeah. So a big raffo on the rest of your statement, as well as Ellen and kind of that there. But, you know, it's definitely something to keep our eyes on. So I want to take a second, and just like we did at the top of the episode, I want to remind everyone, I lodged all of my complaints about Ellen at the beginning of last episode, and I'm going to not talk about it again, I assume, because they pretty much vanish at this point. I mean, it's not so much that those complaints aren't valid at this point. It's that we have explanation as to why he kind of thinks that way. We still don't have the year of time in which he made that transformation and change, but we do at the very least understand his current thought process. So it's kind of an important, you know, non sequitur, but I want to make sure that I said that here, you know, but it's apparent that in his restraint that, like, he still has elements of the character that he had before in his restraint surrounding the death and the mists. And even if there is that kind of like flare of heartlessness and inoculation, he really wants to save the people more than anything else. And it needed to happen eventually. Like, everyone was going to need to be exposed to the mist. And that's also something that we'll have to deal with when we talk about the soldiers. But there is kind of a flare of heartlessness there. Like, there's just this is something that eventually is going to have to happen. And it's not, I guess he's doing the best with the circumstances, and it's not something that can be avoided. So, you know, I don't exactly blame him. It's the practical thing to do. He sums it up nicely in a quote when talking with Fatrin. Fatrin asks, "What kind of monsters are we?" staring out at all those people. And Ellen replies, "The kind that we have to be." And I think that really embodies Ellen right now.
I thought it perfectly reflected the core of Ellen's thought process and decision making through all of this. I felt like it proved against the idea of heartlessness. You can make the argument either way, truly, but
I was saying it's a flare. I don't think it's anything big to even, you know.
Yeah. But if you hadn't brought up that quote, I was going to.
Because it's a great quote, and it's well executed in the section, and the context to it's awesome. I mean, there's quite a bit of that with Ellen talking that way now, of which I do enjoy. He is still a philosopher emperor to some degree, but he has to embody a very different philosophy, and one that he doesn't really entirely agree with. So that said, definitely more to talk about there. We then cut, I guess not really, because we were with Vin the whole time, but we move to a ton of interesting information about the Koloss through the lens of human, the Koloss that Vin had taken over during the fight, that sole Koloss that was hers. And, you know, what do you make about the questions that Vin asks him about how they reproduce and kind of human at large and the Koloss?
Human. What a guy. I was giggling during his conversation with Vin in all of his explanations and his sort of cheeky response of what to call him being human. As far as what I think of the Koloss in general, it was argued, I think from Vin, that the Koloss would basically exterminate themselves fairly quickly due to infighting. So there must be something biological to replenish their numbers. And I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that the infighting started after the Lord Ruler died because presumably he held control over them. And once he died, they weren't controlled by anything anymore. So they were able to kind of fall back into their base instincts, which was created by the Lord Ruler nonetheless. But there's 300,000 of them in the mountains that we learn later through Marsh's perspective. So I think it was just kind of a standing army. They were maybe held in some sort of stasis to stunt aging and growth until needed, but beyond that, I'm not entirely sure. He does mention that the small ones come from us, So I don't know what to make of that, but I don't know if he really understands it either. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think that's a fair question to ask at this point is, how much do the Koloss know about their own reproduction? How intelligent are the Koloss? Human seems far more intelligent than we have assumed the Koloss to be up until this point. Even in the previous book, like we do have some depictions, but it's mostly based on economy and like wanting to live like humans do, and like wanting to take over the city to be people, which I think is it's almost like childish, and Human actually portrays like adult intelligence to some degree. You know what I mean? A higher level of intelligence.
To some degree, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not nuanced very much, but there's clearly intelligence there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating. More to come. It's really interesting that each of these books, and this is something, I don't feel like this is crazy or stepping out of bounds, but at this point in each of the books, we've had like a different member of a different group or like creature that was kind of unique to this world follow around Vin. The first was the Terracemen. They're really people. They're just slightly genetically different as a species. And then you've got, obviously, we have the Kandra in Orsur, of which we didn't really even fully understand, but it was actually Tensoon. And then we have Human now, of whom this is just a small thing at this point, but it is another example of having these three different creatures. And on top of that, to mirror that, we get, I think it's either the next logbook or the following logbook, about the three metallic arts, right? And it seems like each book kind of focused on a different art. Last book had a lot more feruchemy in it. The first book is obviously mostly allomancy. Mm-hmm. And so far, we're teasing hemalurgy. So,
right.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
It's pretty interesting, you know what I mean? Like it's a cool structure to have built these three things, and then to also have each book kind of fixate on those, three different components.
Regarding the Lord Ruler, he utilized feruchemy, but is it possible that those feruchemical bands that he used that were embedded in his skin were actually hemological?
Great question.
Things. I don't know.
Hemalurgical. Yeah.
Hemalurgical, not hemological.
Not a you thing. That's just, I know that's the term because it's made mention, like it's used in that context. So, yeah, I would say that's a great question.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yep. It's so funny. You compare this to Red Rising, and there's not nearly the plot questions like this. Like the world building is so fundamentally different in the way that like a lot of this, some of the mystery is the world building.
Right.
Yeah. I also love the word bivouac. Bivouac is a great word.
Never heard it before.
I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Really? Never heard it before?
I'd never heard that term before.
It's generally used for like camping, right? Like, or kind of like a camping term, right? It's so fun, and it's a weird word that you like don't see anywhere. And, I just think it's really great. I really love it. I love when I can see it. We run into, at the bivouacked troops, we run into General Demu here and the 50,000 men that follow him. It's great that Demu has become this general from, guard to captain to general, which I think is kind of a fun path for him to be on. I find Vin's note about the survivor's spear that he wears really interesting and something definitely worth remarking on talking about, because we are still feeling the impact of Kelsier all over the story. Obviously, again, this part, like the first part of each of the books, is named after him, the survivor, right? So I think this is what Legend of the Survivor, or Legacy of the Survivor, sorry, is what this one is. But we have all these different bits, but I think that the religious angle on him, especially through Elend and Demu, is absolutely fascinating. It is really crazy to see this myth become a religion, like solidify.
Yeah, it is. I'm not really sure if it's worth noting or discussing more on, but I'm going to bring it up, so we're going to. There's the very obvious comparison to Jesus and the cross, and how odd it really is that became the symbol. It makes me wonder again about Anderson's personal like thoughts and feelings on Christianity and faith in general while writing this. Like this is a difficult thing to write from a perspective of a deeply religious person. It feels like it should be.
especially with the like number of different religions talking about different faiths and like the idea. And that's why I think that this story ends up being a very interesting story with faith all over it, is because it's about belief to some degree and like having faith in things, but it's not saying that any faith is right either. And as a deeply religious person, I think that's what's fascinating about it from Brandon's perspective, and how like being open-minded enough to write something about something like this that basically says that faith is a good thing, but can easily be manipulated, as we see in the second book, and can be absolutely twisted, and how a faith grows is I think a fascinating bonus inside of the story. That said, relating to the spear, and I know that I've said that I wasn't going to talk about these, but I love this annotation that he has about this, so I'm going to read it. It doesn't do anything for the story. It's just a little note here that I wanted to give you because I really liked it, and I remembered it right when you had put that in. So it says, so the symbol of the spear, I'm not trying to overtly duplicate Christianity with the spear becoming the symbol of the church of the survivor, much like the cross became for Christians. It just seemed like a very natural symbol, and I do very much like playing with the idea of how a religion grows and changes from a loose set of beliefs into an organized theology. So literally kind of what you were poking at.
I don't believe him.
You don't believe that it's a natural... I think it's kind of natural.
I don't believe that he didn't have it on his mind when he wrote that. Like, that seems like such an obvious comparison.
I'm just saying overt. He's not drawing an overt. He's not trying to draw an overt.
That's what I'm saying. I don't believe.
Yeah, sure. I think that it's a fun thing, and this is one of those that it's like, well, that question's been answered, so I kind of wanted to bring it up, and I prefer interpreting it, and definitely I think the interpretation is always going to be much more interesting. But I do find that one to be kind of fun because he did directly bring it up. He's like, guys, I wasn't trying to. I'm sorry. Yeah. It probably came off a little obvious and strong, huh?
So that's not really the question that I was trying to pose. It was more. It's more about his.
Yes, right.
His thoughts on religion as a whole that I'm curious about. But like we've mentioned before, that's a very deeply personal thing that I don't believe he is like obligated to talk about.
Yeah. Right. I want to make mention of this again. Ellen has this conversation with Fatrin that I think is really critical to comparing his character to what we were talking about last week. This week, he's much clearer with those ideals, like we were saying. But I think in the second conversation, he also kind of gets to the heart of things a little bit more with, the idea of these men having the choice to join the army if they want to, or to go farm. And I think that gets to the idea of what he actually wants to be and represent more than, what's the term that he uses? I think compelling. Yeah, I think he says he compels or compelled them to do the things before, but now it's choice.
Yeah, he makes the comparison to a drowning man pushing against help. So that was the situation they were in before, but now that they're out of it, it's free choice, and that makes a ton of sense given Ellen's character and what we know about his ideals.
Yeah, I think that's totally it. Is that this is the moment for him to kind of come back and refocus on those ideals in a big way. I'm stumbling through this, but I absolutely agree with you. I think that is. He is showing that he hasn't entirely sacrificed those ideals in the altar of practicality, like I was making the point of last week. But it is like helping that drowning man. It's doing the necessary thing while it's necessary, and then, reverting to what needs to be done. So I also liked when we were talking about it that we compared it to like a national weather emergency or something like that in how it's treated.
Right.
You have to respond to help to fix things, and then after the emergency is done, you can revert powers and go back to the way that things were. So
ideally,
right. It doesn't always happen, but truth be told, that is the intent of a lot of those things. So the final lines of this chapter, talking about the meeting that they're going to have, is such a fascinating turn for Ellen. In kind of, I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think that it's such an interesting thing for our hero to say, which is so uncommon, right? So Ellen says, conquering the world, Dumu, or at least what's left of it. And this feels kind of Pinky in the Brainy in the way they're talking to each other and like, well, what are we doing tonight? And it feels very Pinky in the Brainy in a fun way. But at the same time, it's a very sullen comment about the fact that he even has to do this. There's just a lot going on there. This is a very complex thought that Ellen's wrestling.
I think sullen is absolutely the right term to describe the feeling here. it is a conquest of necessity and compassion from Elend's perspective, but it's still a conquest nonetheless that he's going to have to conduct. And I don't think he feels good about that.
No, I don't think so either. I think that he does feel bad about taking away people's sovereignty, which I guess is a good thing to feel, but then why are you know, the answer is we're doing this out of necessity. I understand. I don't need to actually go down that train of thought because I get it and he gets it. But I think that he is actively wrestling with that quite a bit. That's also, I forget if it's this chapter that he also goes into the tent because he's like very tired. I think so. He like very clearly from Vin's perspective, he stops burning pewter and he suddenly seems very tired.
Yes.
I think that's this chapter. It might be the next one, but I cannot recall. I
really
think
it's this one.
Moment.
I don't.
I think it's this one too. I think it's after he sends Fatrin away. He mentions going into the tent, and then they talk in 2 chapters or what have you. So, yeah, cool. All right. With that, we go into chapter 9 here. We've got our logbook as usual. Allomancy was indeed born with the mists, or at least Allomancy began at the same time as the mist's first appearances. When Rashik took the power at the Well of Ascension, he became aware of certain things. Some were whispered to him by rune. Others were granted to him as an instinctive part of the power. One of them was the understanding of the 3 metal arts. He knew, for instance, that the nuggets of metal in the Chamber of Ascension could make those who ingested them into Mistborn. These were, after all, fractions of the very power in the well itself.
The almighty chicken nugget. The chicken nugget of power.
Yeah. Oh, man. It is. Yeah. Yeah. So this, and now I imagine it more misshapen now too. You know what I mean? Like that's the other part. Like it's not. It was almost perfectly spherical in my head in the previous book, and now I just imagine it in like the rough chicken nuggy form.
Is
and
it like doesn't?
Yeah, it's probably a boot, or like a liver. You know, whatever that looks like.
Well, there's the 4. There's the 4 McDonald's chicken nugget shapes that they have. One of them is the boot
shapes.
There are 4 specific shapes. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's really funny. I genuinely didn't know that. Yeah,
there's the boot, the ball, the bell, and the bone.
That's fascinating. I'm super curious now. I'm going to have to look into that more.
I mean, that's all there is to it.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it makes it look more natural. Having a variety of shapes make it look less processed.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And it would add some consistency to the chicken nuggets as well, you know, like consistency when ordering as well. Like you also are always going to have like the same portions or nearly the same portions when you're punching out chicken nuggies out of a mold like this, of which, yeah, I'm also just now imagining punching out chicken nuggies like out of like you get a square nugget, like a giant square nugget, and it's just like a press. And then on the other side, it's
exactly
probably
what it is.
Yeah, I don't think I'm being dramatic or exaggerating at all, but that is it is very funny to me. Now I am giggling about it. Yeah. 3 metallic arts we talked about. Obviously, you were going to say more about the nugget. That was more interesting than going down the McDonald's chicken nugget train. What were you thinking?
No, I was just talking about the nugget, I think. So, but this is something that I believe you and I have brought up before regarding the start of Allomancy being about the same time as the start of the mists and how they're connected, if they're connected, what the draw is, like where are the lines. It just confirms that they started at the same time and doesn't give any more answers beyond that. But
yeah, and it gives us kind of a window into time to some degree to be like, oh, okay, so it was the origin of Allomancy was when the Final Empire really got going, like when Rashik was really kind of. He didn't create Allomancy, it doesn't seem, but no, because he finds the nuggets. Yeah, so he didn't create Allomancy. That's confirmed. But
yeah, he didn't create it. There was also, we knew Ferrachemy existed beforehand based on Belendi's accounts, but then again,
and Quan's.
Oh, Quan's too
as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I was gonna say could have been fucked with, but Quan's could not have.
Yeah. Did I ever bring up the metatext of like you can't trust the second book at all, like all of it? And isn't that kind of funny that you can't trust the book? I think I did in the wrap-up episode. Maybe. There's some fun metatext stuff about the idea that you can't trust anything written in metal and you're reading a paper book.
Yep, we did talk about that.
Yeah. And then there's like, you can also connect that to digital and physical media. Like the idea that like Disney can now go in and like make edits to an old TV show and like publish it. And it's like, well, that wasn't there before. Anyway, cool. All right. With that, we move into the rest of chapter 9. We finally get a name for something within the Kandra homeland. You know, that's kind of what we know it as. The Trust Warren. And this is kind of an interesting thing. I find the Kandra fascinating because they're kind of like, I imagine them like lawyer slugs almost. Like they're all lawyers as people, basically. Like think about it. Kandra are like lawyers, but they're also slugs that have like an internal shell, you know, like you said, jewelry, art, you know, however you want to think about it. But they are all basically lawyers, which is such a funny trait that they all share. Immortal lawyers. What hell is this? And why do I like it so much? But anyway, the Trust Warren. So we find out even more about the third generation of the group of folks involved there in raising the Kandra, and that their society is about 700 years old or so. It also begins to paint a picture for us, that of the father that we're obviously going to talk about more.
Yeah, I'm just loving getting more of this background. I'm gobbling it up. I fucking love it.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and I think I said this earlier. If Brandon didn't create things that were so interesting, like if it wasn't so fucking interesting, I would feel like I'm being told, not shown, everything. But because it's so good, like it's such an interesting concept, I can't even pull it apart because like my attention is absolutely held. I think they call that fridge logic to some degree. Like I think I talked about that term on the show before. If I haven't, fridge logic is where if you're watching a movie or like a TV show or something and you pause it, and you pull yourself out of the experience for a second to think about something. So like you get up and you go to your fridge, right? And you're like, well, that doesn't make sense. It only doesn't make sense because you're no longer paying attention to the medium that it's in. And so you're enraptured by the world or whatever it is that you are a part of. And the moment that you pause it is when like, and you're doing something completely different. And then you think and consider it. It's like, that's not it can be genuine critique, but you were sucked into the world. You were enjoying it. The only reason you're taken out is because you took yourself out.
That makes a ton of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like,
so like what you do to me every week.
Yeah. Yeah. I do literally fridge logic you every week. So yeah, this is literally fridge logic, the show. Fuck. Good point. All right. Yeah. Also, I'm gobbling up the background, but yeah. So we're also introduced to other Kandra here in the second generation, Konpar, who will be leading the trial, it appears, and they are not very happy. It's a she, isn't it? I put he. Is it she? I think it's he. I don't know.
The red bone bitch is what it is. I don't know. I can completely understand the dissatisfaction of having to go through this entire process, though.
Yeah. Right.
But they live within, like you said, they're all lawyers. They live within bureaucracy, and that's where they shall stay.
Yes.
Fucking take it.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, Kempar, he. But yeah, they do live with Kempar is a he. They do live within this state though, and that is you have to fucking deal with it. Yeah. I can't believe it's fascinating that I love this so much, but it is because it just seems like something that wouldn't be entertaining. Like on paper, it's like, yes, we're gonna have these weird creatures try each other kind of in front of for some reason, and they're gonna be rendering, and it's, you know, like I guess trial movies are fun. Okay.
It reminds me
rules.
because it's topical, because of most recent PJ Symposium, the conclusion of the Chernobyl miniseries. It's entirely about a show trial. I had that on my mind when reading this, and I don't know, entertaining, kind of fun, frustrating at times. But
yeah. Oh yeah, very frustrating at times, especially when we get into the actual trial. Because right now we're really just more background, right? And we see, including some of these younger generations that we were talking about, we see Milan. And I love how the younger generations are described as kind of pushing these boundaries. And she's no exception. Her body isn't wood. Her body is, one of her friends is wood. Isn't hers?
No, hers is wood.
Or hers is wood. Yeah. But the fact that this trial is also positioned as a way for them to potentially control the orthodoxy better and like rein in those younger generations as well, I think is really, really interesting. It's, it's cool. So cool.
In a good way. I imagine Milan to kind of be like evocative of a witch doctor from the Diablo series. Like that's the imagery that I'm kind of getting off of this sort of elongated, spindly arms and wooden bones. But in general, I loved the little bit of description that we got from some of the 7th generation members, specifically the one with 4 arms. That's super dope. Why don't more of them do that? That's got to be helpful, right? It's like Goro.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's like four arms. Like, no one in Mortal Kombat should stand a chance. No, the Kandra could kill all the humans. Like, that's the reality here. There aren't that many of them. That's what we kind of know about this, is that there's only, compared to like the Koloss, of which are almost innumerable. They say like each generation is a couple hundred or something like that. I think at this point,
like even
they don't
about
specify.
100. I thought they said.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that sounds right. So maybe 1,000, maybe less, maybe a little bit more.
Less with like, there's questions of if there's even any first generation left at all. All of the second generation are at a table in front of Tensoon.
Right.
So like, there's just a few of the first 3 generations as we're made to understand.
Yeah. I think the third one might have been larger, but they were getting larger and larger over time, but they did start very small.
Well, and they were purged by the Mistborn. And that's why Tensoon, as part of the 3rd generation, forged this contract to stop the killing.
Right. Which is fascinating. And we definitely have to talk about the fact that Tensoon was a part of making that contract, because there are some fun implications there.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Chapter 10. We start off with the logbook. Nuggets of pure allomancy, the power of preservation itself. Why Rashek left one of those nuggets at the Well of Ascension, I do not know. Perhaps he didn't see it, or perhaps he intended to save it to bestow upon a fortunate servant. Perhaps he feared that someday he would lose his powers and would need that nugget to grant him allomancy. Either way, I bless Rashek for his oversight, for without that nugget, Elend would have died that day at the well.
So the only thing I can really add about this one, there's a couple things actually.
He says nugget in every sentence.
There's nugget in every sentence. Wasn't there a few of them? There were a couple.
I think there are 2. I think he says that there are many plates.
But there were only a couple with nuggets. But this makes it seem like there was only one. What happened to the other nugget? Did you eat my other nugget?
I am a consumer.
I specifically had 2 nuggets. I was saving them. You did not ask me for one of my nuggets.
I want to laugh uncontrollably right now. But
I know.
The context for you makes no sense. And I think I am very funny.
I think it was stolen and hidden by somebody. But who?
Ooh, who would do that? Who would dare?
Who would dare?
Yeah.
I've got ideas.
Okay.
We'll find out.
I mean, it also, allomancy directly gets attached to preservation here, right? That's the other thing. So
yeah, I mean, we kind of knew that already through pewter.
Through what?
Oh, you meant preservation in like the capital word sense.
Yeah. Yes.
I thought you were talking about pewter and like
the
healing properties.
Yeah. I understand. Yeah.
Okay.
No.
There is the comment on preservation in this. I feel like it also exists within Tensoon's commentary, because I remember it being with ruin in the same sentence, or at least right.
Yeah. So in the previous book, that's why I did read it to you last episode. Is just to see if you would catch it, and you didn't say anything about it. That's why I read it out loud, because I was like, I'm gonna see if PJ comments on that. I was like, I think I verbatim said something like, it seems unfair to just mention this and not read it in context to give you context. I think that is verbatim what I said, or very close. Gotcha. And so then I read it, and like ruin and preservation are right next to each other. You can't see that, of course, because I was reading it, but it was right there. I did say there was a capital P, though. I remember. Yeah,
okay.
That was pretty bastardly of me.
Giving me context and stuff.
Yeah, I tried. Because it was from the previous book, too. I tried really hard with that one. I mean, I tried to, at the very least, point you in the right direction, because preservation had been mentioned a couple of times. So.
Well, no, it was... I read it today. I know it's in this book, in this section.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Tensoon talks about preservation and ruin.
No. This is the first mention... Well, maybe later. Yes.
Okay.
In 109. This is the first mention of preservation in the book, though.
Gotcha.
It is in this section, but...
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah. Yes. Later he says ruin and preservation. Cool. All right.
Mhm.
We are back, though, with Sazed working through religions again through his kind of voice and in his head. And Larstitism is the faith that he is interrogating right now. And it's also the faith that he married Ellendon Vin with. And ultimately, it's also Mare's faith. And so there's kind of a lot of connective tissue here. And to see this faith torn down, man, is fascinating, because so much of the story has been propelled by this one faith in different chunks and parts.
And the way that he discredits this one is shaky at best. It seems out of spite more than an actual like logic reason like the rest of them have been. He's equating this long dead view of the physical world to today's clearly like altered and corrupt version. And it's dishonest at best to say that this contradict what does he say? Observed truths or something like that.
Yeah, this is very much the personification of sometimes when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Like he's like, I have to make a decision. And any good scholar would instead go, no, I don't have to make a decision, but I do eventually need an answer. So like, this is one that you feel like if you were really trying to be honest about it, like you're saying, you would leave that one on the table and go to the next one, potentially.
Yeah. He wants to discredit all of these religions.
Yes, exactly. Right. Yeah. Everything looks like a nail to him, which is unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah. But maybe he's resigned himself to the idea that there is no greater meaning. And as long as he can prove that, he can feel good about his newfound nihilism.
I think that's exactly what he's doing. I think it's spot on in terms of kind of what's going on. And yeah, newfound nihilism for sure. He's just buried in his own shit. I think inside of the future spoilers or no spoiler zone or something like that, we were talking about very different characters, but we were trying to delineate between sad boy and emo boy because they are different. Like,
what'd you come up with for the delineation?
We really didn't draw the delineation, but we did lump our characters into the group differently to make it make sense.
Okay.
Ephraim is a sad boy and a different character is an emo boy. Yeah. So that was kind of the comparison. I think it had something to do with being annoying about it too, which is just weird. Again, probably not scientific, probably looking for a nail with a hammer.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
But it was pretty good. So I love the conversational flair that Breeze layers in and adds to the story as well. His comments on the ash being unimaginative, I think, is hilarious. Where he's like, well, if I was doing it, I'd make it fucking red. Like the rivers would run red and they would look like blood. Like that would be so fucking cool. It kind of feels like Brandon's also like, my editor shot me down. The ash was supposed to be red. There's also like that little like climate change through line in the story as well that I think is kind of interesting, especially from Sazed's perspective, where he's like he's like I think he says something like, this is natural. Like he goes into like this weird like, well, maybe the climate's just changed, or maybe it's just a change, maybe it's not anything to do with it being evil or breezes, and it's just, there's just a nice little nugget of funny, not a nugget of almantic power, but a nugget of funny there. Despite also, like, we live in a society in which people talk that way all the time about climate change, and it's very frustrating.
That's true.
But
that's a good point. This whole conversation was reminiscent for me to, like, pre-death of Kelsier.
Mm.
And the way that
the way that
Breeze is. Yeah.
Got it.
It was fun for me to reminisce a little bit on that sort of conversation style that we've been missing, but then we get more of it later, so it's kind of overshadowed.
Yeah. I do agree with you. I think that this is something that's been kind of missing, and that I'm glad to see back in Breeze's character, because he feels less burnt out, like you did kind of in the last story. Like he was in a great place and he was a great character and he was still fun, but it did feel like he was potentially just waiting for death to eventually come, like everyone in that story was, while they were in. So there is like a little bit more hopefulness, as he's like we talked last week, like he's regained a little bit of weight and like he's, it's just kind of in better sorts. I think some of that also has to do with Allrianne, of whom we'll talk about in a moment here, and kind of the way that relationship seems to be more honest and good for him, good for like his spirit to not like contain those feelings, I think, in that way, or to be like, Yeah.
Yeah.
He's got a better approach to it. But I do want to read this little quote here that I really liked because there's so many quotes inside of Sazed's perspective. Obviously, again, emo boy here in the moment talking about a lot of these things. I don't mean that he's annoying. Please don't take that out of context. But the sense of despair inside Sazed wanted to snap that simply believing wasn't enough. Wishing and believing hadn't gotten him anywhere. It wouldn't change the fact that the plants were dying and that the world was ending. I just think that is perfectly encompassing of Sazed's grief.
Yeah. It's such a stark difference from the Sazed that we used to know. He was all in on the idea that hope was something worthy in its own right. And it's just such a depressing turn that we've seen him go through. Our sad little
depressed boy. Yeah, sad boy. You're right. He's probably a sad boy, not an emo boy. That also gets off the annoying train. I like Sazed quite a bit in this story because he is actually his own foil, which is fascinating, and as a path for that character to walk, it's very, very interesting to follow.
Right.
So Captain Goradel is here again, all the way from the end of the Final Empire. And that kind of kindness that Vin had showed forever ago has still made this massive difference. This guy has been useful. I think that this is something that I want to talk about because it goes all the way back to the Final Empire, because she reflects in that moment that Kelsier would have just killed this guy, right? And it turns out he's been kind of instrumental in a couple of different moments in saving Vin's life, coming back and saving and passing on the information to Ellen. And then in the last story, he had a couple of moments. And then here, I mean, he's a captain. He's important to the function of the army. And I just think that that's such a great juxtaposition of that decision making and showing firmly how choosing to spare a life would have been better than the path that Kelsier ran down,
Yeah. And that's a very, very good point to bring up. And hopefully Vin can take that. But I feel like she already has. She's already kind of come around to the idea that her path is better than the one that Kelsier was kind of going down. So.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think she's definitely there mentally. I just think it's a good reminder to the reader and to the listener. This is a thematic homecoming to some degree, especially when we consider that the name of the part is Legacy of the Survivor,
Right.
So another example of how pushing against that legacy was actually a good thing as opposed to fully embracing it. So Breeze and Alrian. So we have to talk about the riders, of course, that are approaching with Captain Gordell, and that's Alrian. Yay, we love Alrian. Woo!
Yay.
Your favorite. The entire conversation is really interesting because Breeze is kind of avoiding marriage, right? So this is all from Sazed's perspective, and he's like, Breeze is avoiding marriage out of not wanting to leave Alrian a widow. So they're very much in love and basically married is what the book says, even though Sazed wouldn't probably have married them anyway. And he goes into this depressing internal rant about what even is official? What does official mean? It's just oh, dude, you are so far gone. Yeah. What'd you think about Alrian, Breeze, and kind of the knowledge that they're married and kind of everything else there?
So I didn't get such a warm feeling from Breeze when they see her as much as I would have expected. So it kind of caught me off guard how far their relationship has progressed in the last year that we haven't seen them. But it was a sentence, so that's not much to take off. Good for Breeze though. It's good for him to be in what I can only hope is a healthy relationship with a good person. We'll see about that. I feel like we get a bit of a contradiction here though on Breeze's age. It is firmly established now that he's in his mid-40s, but I am almost certain he was called mid-30s in the last book.
Kelsier was definitely called mid-30s. I don't remember Breeze.
Yeah, I thought it was from Alrian's perspective when she's in Set's camp after everything. I thought she talked about his age not being as big of a gap
deal. Yeah.
It wasn't that big of a gap, but she was kind of making
Didn't someone make the
deal.
joke twice the age? Yeah.
Someone made that joke, but
yeah.
But I could have sworn he was established as 35 in that section.
Yeah. I don't feel like you're wrong. I'm just trying to recall. Yeah, I'm not sure. It is important to say that 4 years have passed since the very first novel, so some people have aged up, but you're saying last novel, so that's only been a year. But 4 years have passed. Yeah.
I don't know.
Good question. I'll double check. We'll
find out.
Yeah.
It's not that important, really. But
it's not in my crazy extensive wiki that I use all the time. Thank you again, Coppermind and the 17th Shard for that. But yeah,
thank you for the
details
thing
and
that
names
I still can't use.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to use it for a while, buddy. Yeah. Not on the page though. That was interesting to me. So yeah. So any other thoughts about the marriage or anything like that with Orianne, the returning character, the way that they aren't quite pushing on each other's emotions the same way?
I just still find her annoying and don't like her as a person. So,
God damn it.
I don't know.
Okay. All right.
I don't trust her.
There.
I still don't trust her.
I mean, that's fair enough. I get it. Let me put it that way. I understand. But yeah. Okay. Vin, of course, shows up. This, of course, is a fantastic moment here between the two where they contemplate what exactly Sazed is now. What do you make of him in this moment? We've been talking about this a little bit back and forth, being kind of the depressed, broken person that he is. But I think specifically in the way that he's even despondent to Vin is different than he's vocalizing a lot more.
Yeah. He's broken and he's lost and depressed and spiteful at the universe, I guess. Like that's kind of the extent of the read that I've got on him at this point. Just beat down.
Well, and especially the way that he like denies Vin when she's talking about the faith and like the reasons to believe, like we were citing previously, that he's always kind of had in the previous books. And even as I think Breeze said last week, like the most faithful of us losing faith is, frightening. Yeah. I think that this confrontation with Vin is kind of like the opposite of all the other conversations, which really I think shows their friendship moving from like really a mentor-mentee relationship that it was from the first book. And then in the second book, it's more of like a close friend father figure. This is now, I think that this is a father that needs help. And I think that that's actually a really interesting thing to have a character go through with their kid being like, no, you've been the good guy. You've been this good example. And to have that conversation like that, there's just a good, open, honest, I don't know, level of communication. Yeah.
Yeah. She's a good friend.
Right.
I like the father-daughter comparison. I think you brought that up last time as well. But more than anything, she's just a good person. It's
right.
Beautiful that she's able to recognize this pain that her very close friend is in and do what she can to try to alleviate it a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that I think we're in Sazed's perspective for all of this.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so. I'm pretty sure. So, but we're in Sazed's perspective, and when we've been in Vin's perspective, she seems like hungry, like she's chasing after something. Like she has this kind of like riled up energy of like, okay, we need to go to the next thing. We need to do the next thing. No, Ellen, you're doing the right thing. There's a little bit of like of race to her pace to do things right now. A hunger to get to the next lockbox room cache. But here, it's like she takes the time to slow down and really like be a good friend in this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she does.
Yeah. There is this one thing that I want to say. Vin talks about like holding that power, the unimaginable power that was contained within the well, but also she talks about like that power and the deep power that of love that Sazed has taught her and trust and everything else. And to me, I think that's one of the most lovely parts of like all the books. It is kind of that like note of real growth and like it's lovely moment. I said it like 5 times, but ugly tears here.
Yeah, for sure. She does mention like there's a strange reaction from Sazed at one point where she mentions like the feeling of holding the power before she compares it to anything to do with Sazed. He like perks up at the description of her talking about the power that she's held. Don't know what to make of that, if there's anything to make of that there, but
yeah. And there's this quiet, like after that happens, after they talk about being the last of the keepers, is he a keeper and whatnot, he says after, a moment of silence, I am doing what I can, lady. In my own way, I must find the answers for myself before I can provide them to anyone else. Still have the etching delivered to my tent. I promise that I will at least look at it. And, that's at the very least, he's still being this active ambassador. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next section when he's getting sent on his mission. But he is securing his own life mask before helping others. Like at the very least, he's got his head on his shoulders enough to know that he needs to do that for himself. before he can even do anything for anyone else. So I think that being conscious of that is a lot of the times for many people, most of the battle.
Yeah.
You know,
I like that description too.
Yeah.
Life mask, the
Right.
oxygen mask.
Yeah. 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 I've heard that one too many times from my sister describing me getting things done. So help yourself before you help others, Crossland. So any other thoughts on this chapter?
No, I think we covered everything.
I think we hit most of it. Only thing I'd end with is the idea of this, like the photo that Vin gives of the Lerastium. And then somehow he still kind of makes, he made that decision before. Yeah. I don't know. It's just about the faith being dead. But at the very least, you know, we get a little bit of something positive out of the faith.
It's a contradiction to that thought process that maybe he'll be able to, maybe it'll plant something in him. Maybe it'll take root.
Maybe the picture of the flower will take root. Cool. All right. I'm going to read this very long logbook entry here at the top of chapter 11. So, the first contract spoken of by the Kandra was originally just a series of promises made by the first generation to the Lord Ruler. They wrote these promises down and in so doing codified the first Kandra laws. They were worried about governing themselves independently of the Lord Ruler and his empire, so they took what they had written to him, asking for his approval. He commanded it cast into steel, then personally scratched a signature into the bottom. This code was the first thing that a Kandra learned upon awakening from his or her life as a Mistwraith. It contained commands to revere earlier generations, simple legal rights granted to each Kandra, provisions for creating new Kandra, and a demand for ultimate dedication to the Lord Ruler. Most disturbingly, the first contract contained a provision which, if invoked, would require the mass suicide of the entire Kandra.
Holy fuck, I totally was sure that's what he was gunning for in this trial, was invoking that final mass suicide provision. But I can't remember what we talked about. Was it revealed that, like, we knew that Mistwraiths and Kandra were, I think they were described as cousins.
Yes.
And I can't remember if I had called Kandra growed up Mistwraiths or the other way around.
No, you had said that. Yeah, you said
okay.
Kandra were growed up Mistwraiths.
Okay. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. I think we got some of it in the Well of Ascension that they were more connected, but all the way back in the Final Empire, that's when you said growed up Mistwraiths. Because it's near the end of that book is when we're introduced to that idea.
Right. That's when we're really kind of
introduced to Kandra in general, the whole trick.
Yeah.
Of oh god, what's his name? Works. Yeah, but what's the guy's name? I know it's Orsur.
Renew?
The Kandra. Renew. Yes, thank you. I couldn't remember Renew's name. I was like, well, what's his name? I don't remember. But yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean the idea of the contract and really getting it so formally told to us, I think in this facet is really cool to get all of this clarity kind of in a really quick dose. I mean, I did make a joke that it's a long logbook. It is long for a logbook. I think it's the longest one so far. But well, I think chapter 12 is longer technically, but it is a long logbook entry, and I think it's really important, and it delivers a lot of really great information. Whoever is writing this logbook in the future, as we've kind of determined after the end of the world, is certainly taking their time and is also jumping a little bit here and there, hither thither.
Yeah, but
so
then again, this doesn't have to be chronological, as we've seen before. Like these could be completely separate sections of whatever text this is.
Yes, yeah, I do agree with you. I find it funny that we move from, like, we are kind of logically staying in Kandra territory with the preservation, the power of preservation, blah, 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 Allomancy. But it does jump from, like, Allomancy to Kandra.
That's, yeah.
It's more of it's more commentary than it is a critique or anything. It's just like, you know, logbook doing its thing. Logbook and a logbook, you know?
True.
And so that trial that we've been talking about begins in earnest. I find the disdain the seconds and kind of Kandra have at large for humans to be really fascinating. Like this idea that they use glowstones in many places and then they have oil in some, but they often don't light the oil because they don't want to interact with humans at all. it's really interesting, especially as they talk about Straff and Zane, and he begins to kind of plant the seeds about his connections with Vin here, and as so named a little bit later, the mother.
Yeah, this is also they jump in with this sort of attack about him killing Orsur, and he has a very, very good argument about the fact that Orsur wasn't covered by the contract. And I really thought that should have had more sway, but that's just kind of every argument that he has in general should have had more sway. And this is a show trial. That's all this feels like, you know?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it is just a show trial though. And you know, that's why they do say, I think the line about this being, this isn't, I think it's much later, but this isn't a trial, this is a judgment, which is such a powerful comeback that Campar has to Orsur, or not Orsur, to Tensoon.
The point is super valid. He's already confessed his guilt. So with that respect, yeah, that would make this a judgment hearing, not a trial.
And it's all cover. You know what I mean? Like they wanted Tensoon to die so that he wouldn't talk about the contract. Now they're shouting really loudly because they want to ensure that the stuff doesn't get out about the contract, and they don't want to pose questions on society, and they don't want to force change, which is even like further echoed with his question about like, have you been outside lately to Campar? Like, have you seen what's going on outside? If you opened your window, it's very like Horton Hears, I think Horton Hears a Who, something like that. Very Horton Hears a Who, where it's like the apocalypse is going on outside if you look. Like, it's not a good time. You just got to look.
I think he either says the last 10 years or the last 100 years, and I can't remember which.
I think it's the last 100 years. Yeah. We've been outside the last 100 years. It's like biting. There's a lot of good biting commentary here between the two. Very entertaining dialogue. Very well written. Yeah, for sure. Speaking of writing, Tensoon having helped write the contract is fascinating to me. I did not remember this detail. And in reread, I was like, oh, fuck, that's even crazier that he kind of had a hand in this. But, you know, even then, the way that these old Kandra are spinning it, man, it's full fucking defamation. They're going, you know, shouting down, this isn't a trial, this is that judgment. And he stands firm that he did not break his contract. And I think that makes for one of the most fun arguments inside of this, is that because he was serving the first contract, because Vin killed the Lord Ruler, she is in fact the mother replacing the father, even though there weren't necessarily provisions as such. She was given the knowledge because she did kind of take the place there. Yeah. His argument is that she took the place in doing so.
I want the actual text of the first contract to see if there is actually a provision there. Like if there is something that mentions the progression of ownership, I guess, of that title, but we don't have that text.
Yeah. It's something that feels like an interpretation, right? It's like strict constitutionalist versus interpreting the Constitution, which I think is a fun, you know, kind of take on it too.
But Tensoon seems so particular about the fact that he broke that contract because he was following the other one.
Yes. Yeah.
Like that's the entire hinge of this argument, is that there has to be some sort of provision that would grant Vin as title of mother before he can even make that argument.
I think that he's interpreting it to make that argument, if that makes sense.
But interpreting what? I want to know what he's interpreting.
Well, right. I mean, it is a document that he wrote, which is the reason that I think he is also...
he wrote the second one.
Well, the first contract, it is no longer in existence.
It was stamped into metal. That's the one that was stamped into metal and signed by the Lord Ruler. And then the other contract came after that, giving the Kandra rules about existing within society and being servants so they're not slaves.
Wait, the second contract, what second contract are you talking about? The one with Zane?
Yeah, the contracts that they, or I guess not second, but the contracts that they create with whoever they're serving.
Got it. Okay, so you wanted to see how the first contract was written, or the contract that was written to Zane? I'm trying to clarify here.
It felt to me like the first contract, the first contract,
yes,
is something separate from what Tensoon helped write, because it felt like the first contract was written at the onset of the existence of the Kandra. Or am I completely getting this wrong? The one that was stamped into metal and signed by the Lord Ruler.
Yeah, because that's the open here. The words are specific, Kanpar. I know them well. I helped write them. We were both there when these service contracts were created, using the first contract itself as a model. There you are. That's what you were looking for.
So there's blanket service contracts.
Yes. So he wasn't there for writing the first contract, the suicide contract. He was writing the service contract for working for people with the Yep.
Okay.
I just wanted to add clarity there. Yes. Yeah, totally. So he is arguing an interpretation of the first contract, which he did not write.
Right.
He is
we
also
don't have
directly,
that text, and I want it.
He is also directly citing basically the service contracts that he was a part of writing the model for.
Right.
Which is why he cites kind of it back in their face, in Kampar's face.
That just, it got a little word soupy with the term contract.
Yes, yeah, we were just, it was the word doesn't mean anything anymore because we've said it so many times. Contract. So yeah, Kandra. What does it mean? Okay. And so then the firsts pass their judgment. Sentencing will occur in a month's time, after we hear all of these arguments kind of back and forth between the two, and some of the other seconds chime in here and there. But
I think it's an important distinction to make here that the firsts did not pass judgment. The seconds did. The first just didn't say anything. And Tensoon makes a comment, I think internally, questioning whether or not the firsts actually are alive, because they can't see up there. It's too dark. It's too far away. There's just human-shaped blobs up there. So it's entirely possible that there was some sort of coup, and the seconds are entirely running the show.
Do you think there was a coup?
I think so. I think that makes a ton of sense. Like, this is a strange power dynamic to have the seconds passing the judgment on behalf of the firsts, only if the firsts don't chime up and say anything in like support. Like, maybe not a coup, but it's deceptive at best if that's the case. And like, who knows what the written doctrines are and how it's all set up, but I don't know. It seems shady.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's a fun thread to pull on for sure. Cool. All right. With that, we move into chapter 12, the longest chapter of the week. Actually, this one's the long one. It's not the season one. It's this one. That said, I think I tried to slim it down to make it reasonable to approach. We do have again another long logbook entry. So here it is. Rashek moved the Well of Ascension. Obviously, it was very clear of him. It was very clever of him, perhaps the cleverest thing he did. He knew that the power would one day return to the well. For power such as this, the fundamental power by which the world itself was formed, does not simply run out. It can be used, and therefore diffused, but it will always be renewed. So knowing that rumors and tales would persist, Rashek changed the very landscape of the world. He put mountains in what became the north and named that location Terrace. Then he flattened his true homeland and built his capital there. He constructed his palace around that room at its heart, the room where he could meditate, the room that was a replica of his old hovel in Terrace, a refuge created during the last moments before his powers ran out.
Most of that, I feel like we had all of that information in bits and pieces to a certain extent. The little refuge of his home in Terrace is a fun little bit, and have they discovered that yet? Have they found that at all?
Well, they would have never been able to find it.
What do you mean?
What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? He got rid of Terrace as it was.
Right.
And he turned. So like Creedic Shaw, that little center room inside of the place is his hovel. The pooping room is his hovel. Okay. His old Terrace home. We've been calling it the pooping room for a very long time, but that's why it's covered with like the weird furs, and it's kind of that exotic, that strange feel, and that's why it feels so odd and off. And he literally made his tiny little house that he like grew up in basically and owned into a palace. for like ruling over an empire, but he kept the little house as like this like memento or token of,
Okay.
life.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think it's really
I wasn't sure if that
fascinating.
was like a sudden new thing that could be discovered. But then this is written by our people, so
Yeah.
Yeah. Never.
Yeah, this is someone who has some foresight, maybe, or has extra sight. Yeah. We know that this person is the hero of ages. So unfortunately, yeah, as it goes. So the chapter opens up with a conversation about what is going on with Sazed and what can be done for the man who's lost his faith. And man, belonging to the church versus having faith as well that Vin puts on Elend was a strong swing. Like that was a right hook that connected with the jaw to me when I was reading it. And I don't think the text sits there and luxuriates on it a whole lot, but I think that's a fantastic comparison. And I also think that's something that Brandon's been poking at over the last two books has been, what is faith versus, belonging to something versus hope versus belief in general.
Yeah. So definitely a good point. And it makes me question about what Elend actually does for or within the church at this point, if anything, or if it's strictly a title that he's kept for himself. Member.
Yeah. It does poke interestingly at that, and it is something that would be nice to see more of, to your point.
I agree.
Yeah. I think that it's fun to see that kind of poked at a little bit. I think, again, Brandon is doing a really good job of interrogating faith versus religion versus belief on the whole. So
yeah, he is.
I really enjoy that about these books. So much of this, as Vin says, really is on Elend's shoulders, and we pretty much spend the rest of the chapter dealing with that in detail, like this idea that the world literally rests on Elend's shoulders. That's what being an emperor is. He goes kind of through the circles that show how the world is quickly diminishing around Luthadel, and showing how the encroachment and how it will increase, and the farmable, arable land that they'll have, to the point of where the crops won't be able to grow soon on Scadrial at all. They're predicting by next winter basically being fucked.
Yeah. Having that map is a daunting representation of how fucked they really are going forward pretty soon. And I feel like it's a pretty brilliant way to inspire innovation and problem solving amongst the group. Having that sort of doomsday clock to a certain extent right on the table for everybody to look at. We'll see if anything comes of it, but I don't know.
Yeah, we will see. It's nice to also have a clock in the story in general, something that gives us a sense of time and kind of puts us in a limiting factor to kind of understand the threat, especially since everything is so kind of esoteric as far as threats go. You know what I mean? Like this idea that we're fighting a ghostly entity or creature or force that makes itself manifest in these spiked inquisitors. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's weird. So this gives a sense of, okay, we're fighting against time. Here's our clock.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It is much more rooted in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It helps keep it there, because otherwise this could feel like just a giant faceless threat they couldn't really do anything against. And I have some more thoughts and commentary on that, but Elend is doing his best that he can to possibly hold everything together, but of course insecurity is just whispering in Vin's ear as it does, and says hope is for the foolish after all. And I like that little bit again.
God damn it though. Like Green's back again. Fuck.
Yeah.
But it's proven to be a useful tool for us to see sort of Vin's personal headspace and what sort of level of insecurity she's feeling. So I like that we have that sort of tool. But
yeah,
I wish she wasn't feeling so badly.
Right. It is nice. And it's, again, this is a reminder. This first 120 pages, I mean, we're not completely through, but this is very much so kind of a reintroduction to characters and everything to like get us set up. It's like 120 pages before the story really kicks off to some degree.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I do really enjoy this book, but this is right now we're like setting up everything to actually see the chess pieces move with intention now. if that makes sense. Set's sass as they plan, I think, is also pretty great. He's got some of the funniest bits in the chapter for sure, as he, is kind of just this general asshole. And in the previous book, he literally had Elendel almost conquered. It was on the verge of being taken over, and the fact that he's now this like ally and leader and kind of funny guy, kind of dick, just makes for a real great moment. They run through many details here. I didn't want to like pick through each individual part, so I'm just going to kind of summarize it here, and we can talk about the whole plan as a whole, because it's kind of sprinkled throughout the chapter. They're assessing the situation. The well is dried up of power. We know that. The storage caches, as well as the two cities they need to find that they can kind of contend with, that we have to talk about, are going to be Urto, which is the old Venture stomping grounds, and then Fadrix, which is Set's old city, and the home of that final cache that we think may contain Atium potentially, as Reen's whispers mention as well. Like, kind of. Like, the question is it like Vin's insecurity, or is it like, I don't know.
Yeah,
but
good question there.
Yeah,
I'm fucking loving this entire story, man. It has everything all at once. It is action and magic and physics and politics and strategy, just smashed together. Smashy smash. It's like, all of it is coming through in this like little meeting, and it's really fun and exciting. It's just exciting.
Yeah, it is a very exciting book for that reason, and this is kind of all of those things coming together in a big way. And I mean, there's a lot here that's going on, and this part sets the tone for kind of where we're going to be going for the rest of the story. I think it sets the precedent and the tone about like, okay, so some of us are going to be going to Urto. Here's who's going to Urto. And then we've also got Fadrix, which is where we're going to need the Allomancers. That's where I'm going to go, and that's where Vin will go. And so Sazed and a couple of people are going to go over to Urto, take care of that, take care of what's going on there. They have to deal with King Yeoman. They want to, solve this with diplomacy.
Sazed's just like, can I not?
Yeah, Sazed's like, can I not? And they're like, no, you can't not. Elend says that the Lord Ruler, this is just this weird bit that comes out in this meeting, right? Elend says that the Lord Ruler wasn't even evil exactly, that he just kind of got carried away. And like, I kind of think that he's right, but at the same time, obviously what the Lord Ruler did is deplorable. This is one of those weird things that I have trouble with in Elend's perspective, where it's like, yeah, he was just doing it to survive. Like, he had to make adaptations, but he didn't need to enslave an entire people to like, you know what I mean? Like, this is a little bit too much apologism.
Yeah. A little bit. This is exactly the point that we were bringing up last week. I'm glad to see that Elend is kind of holding that view and is able to articulate it a little bit more precisely than I could, or we could.
Than I just did.
But yeah, there's still that whole subjugation thing that has to be dealt with in that argument. So just a little problem in that one, but.
Yeah, and I mean, not just that, but the gradual extermination and sterilization of the terrorist people.
That too.
The literal eugenics going on. So like, yeah, the Lord Ruler was dealing with a shitty hand, but it's not that he just got carried away, Elend, which is the quote. It's not that he just got carried away. Like, that's a little too soft a point.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's a rough description, I think.
Yeah. And then, things really come to a head in this meeting, and we're kind of interrupted, right? With a strange occurrence, that of an earthquake begins. And this is where I really kind of wanted to talk about the intangibility of this threat, right? Like, this is kind of the point in which this whole thing feels like the world is breaking down and is really destroying itself, which is where it's so important to have set this expectation to give this kind of personification of ruin to some degree through Marsh. This is just a masterfully crafted way of having an intangible big bad, in the same way that like Sauron is kind of an intangible big bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Everything is crumbling in this world. It's wild. And it's progressed slowly and persistently to the point where like most of these people aren't even reacting to the fact that there's a fucking earthquake going.
Right.
Strong enough to knock things over in the tent. And they describe it as like a little one.
Right. And they're just very casual about it. Very casual about the whole thing. Reminds me of probably what most Californians feel like with earthquakes versus like how people who don't live in California feel.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's one of those things on Twitter that you'll see every once in a while where people will be like, "Did you feel that?" And that's how you know they're from California. Like if they don't have it in their profile, because everyone will tweet like, "Did you feel that?" And you'll be like, so you're from California, you're from California, you're from California. It's just a tell because it's like, yeah, didn't do anything though, yeah. It is funny. It just gave me that image, that memory. But
yeah.
So diplomacy is the stick on which Elend leans to want to take Fadrix, but he will invade if he has to take the land from King Yeoman, of whom is there, with a violent Koloss if he really needs to. And that's, again, it's a step. It's just all these like little, he's just tiptoeing a little bit of the wrong direction, but it's a necessary thing. We can kind of understand that, especially given the potential contents of that cache, right? So that's why we ultimately have to do that. And it's something that like Ham doesn't want to go along with. It's something that a lot of, members of the crew don't necessarily initially kind of agree with or come around to. There's a little bit more uncertainty there. But Elend is in charge, so they kind of listen. As a part of that, though, Sazed understands that his voice can still be heard and other people do. Sazed brings up something really important, which is that his army will have to walk into the mists for the first time and take 15% casualties just from exposure.
That's a pretty insane prospect.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, everybody's at those odds, right? So who they're attacking is also dealing with a 15% casualty rate just for being out there. But I guess they could have been protected up until this point. Yeah, they could have been protected. They could be inside. And they can stay inside until the siege happens, so maybe that's not so much of a problem. Yeah, I still want to know. They're very matter of fact about the rules in which they like. It's about 1 in 6. Most of them survive, but some don't. Animals are immune. Like this feels intelligent in how it's being chosen, and it feels very much not just kind of a hazard of being in the mist, but rather like these people are being chosen for some reason. I don't know.
Yeah.
Don't have enough to make more of it than that, but there's something.
There's definitely, yeah, it is. That's an interesting take. Yeah.
Cool.
Sweet. You. I like Elend also in this moment after kind of talking about the exposure in the mist and things like that, and the deepness, that we've talked about on the whole as we've gone through this. I like Elend finally asks about Kelsier, about the survivor, and he doesn't want to know about the religious figure that we've kind of come to know Kelsier as, but he wants to really be exposed to the real story of the man. And I think that's really great character building for me on Elend's part to finally like kind of ask this and for us to get to hear it. I just think it reinforces the actual faith and belief that he has, not only in like the church of the survivor potentially, but also in what the man meant for people. I love all the different takes here, from Vin to Breeze to Ham. Just a man, used people and made them better, and kind of how Elend himself shapes up against that legend is what we're really kind of left with at the end of the scene. Yeah, I don't know. That was a lot of kind of thoughts scattered.
I think.
What'd you think?
This was an important conversation all around for everybody involved, except maybe Set. Right off the bat, we get Damu jumping in and like going into the rhetoric, and he gets kind of shut up a little bit, and then gets to experience this like hand account from several different people about the person that he worships. So that's got to be pretty cool. The reminiscing has to be cathartic and valuable for a lot of them. Elend gets the insight that he was looking for, and just I think reminiscing for most of them is the major contribution, but maybe an opportunity to refocus and remember where they came from, why they're here, and how it all worked to begin with. I don't know if they'll actually start laughing and smiling all the time, because it'll feel a little forced now that it's been brought up in a direct way. Right. But maybe there'll be more of a conscious effort to see the bright side of things. Mm-hmm. And that's better than nothing.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, is that like that is such, I think, an important takeaway too from who Kelsier was and what he really meant to these people, is that he was the source of happiness. He was kind of a glowing thing, and like the Lord Ruler couldn't take that away. I do find so not only do I think that maybe I think Ariane even takes something away from this meeting. Yeah, Set might be.
Oh,
so
I
think
forgot
Set
she
is
was in
probably
there
doing
too.
She is. She says, "Isn't that like insensitive?" I think at one point or something like that. But instead, I think she was taking stuff away. She was obviously internalizing it. But I think, in particular, I'm looking for it here when Vin says that he was just a man. I just loved that commentary. He was a man, Vin said quietly, just a man. Yet you always knew he'd succeed. He made you be what he wanted you to be. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, Kelsier.
Like I said, at this point with the story, we are officially 120 pages in, and the story has begun.
Let's go.
It's kind of, I like to think about the first part of this book as like a very long prologue, because it does it, and there are great moments in here, but it does feel like it's a lot to get to where we need to be, which is good because like I was kind of complaining about last week, it felt like we just we skipped ahead and we started, and this book doesn't luxuriate in that. It doesn't spend a lot of time skipping, and I think you could have treated something like this like a prologue in a different author's hand. I don't think it would have been as good. So I am glad for what I read. I'm just trying not to come off as a critical dipshit for no reason. With that, we have chapter 13 here. We've got our logbook, another short Marsh chapter, but here in the logbook, hemalurgy, as it's called, because of the connection. Hemalurgy, it is called because of the connection to blood. It is not a coincidence, I believe, that death is always involved in the transfer of powers via hemalurgy. Marsh once described it as a messy process, not the adjective I would have chosen. It's not disturbing enough.
Oh, so a couple things to take away from that. One, I just want more. Give me Gib rules. But an interesting or an important, I think, specification that's made there is transfer of powers. So does that mean that they can be, I don't know what it means. It's obviously always terrorismen based on our context, or it always has been terrorismen that are used as the sacrifice. Not sure if that's important due to their connection to Farrakami or not. Is the power in the spike intrinsically and it's imbued into the person and that's considered a transfer? Can that spike be like reused for somebody else? It's making me really kind of question what's it all mean, Crossland?
You're picking
Where's
at
it all going?
Yeah, you're picking at it. Yeah. And I think this chapter does a really good job of making you pick at that a little bit, because we go back with Marsh, of whom has 10 new spikes in him. And that makes him ostensibly the most powerful of the Inquisitors in the words in the text. Like, that's what's said. And man, he is in an odd place still, of course. We'll talk more about the powers, but being controlled by a crazy all-powerful force will do that to you, or creature, or whatever this is, I guess. The fixation of Ruin being here or there is really interesting to me as well, that he could be elsewhere. Like, his attention is fixated in some other part, I think is kind of the way that it's described. And that very much reminds me of like the Eye of Sauron as it's depicted in the Lord of the Rings movies, looking around with the giant glow.
Yeah, man, that's terrifying. And to know that he's like not in control for the most part is just horrible. He's a prisoner in himself. He's a prisoner and a tool.
Yeah, he's not having a great time. Let's be real.
He is. Is he sad boy or emo boy? I'm not sure.
Ooh,
I didn't see the description. I didn't see the delineation.
I think he is saddest boy. Marsh's saddest boy, I think, because wow, he's just waiting for a moment where he can pull his own spike out. Like that he is like the definition of existence is pain in the most high level version of that meme.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, but there's those 10 new spikes. There's that fixation. Yeah, thoughts?
What can they do? What can he do now?
What can they do?
Are they all different metals? Rules, Crossland. I want rules.
Well, you don't get them here.
I know.
So he thinks about Kelsier in this time as well, of course. His brother, Mayor her death and how he loved her as well, and how they both, both the brothers had this love and affection for Mare. And he blames Kelsier for all of this, and I mean, all of this is in the literal state of the world, right? And in what had happened, because this is, after all, kind of Kelsier's fault at large, as Marsh points out to some degree. And I don't want to pin fault completely, but like,
kind of, but he's not saying like I wish it hadn't happened. He says it should have been me. Yeah, like it's jealousy more than anything.
Wait, are we talking about the marriage, or are we talking about killing the Lord Ruler?
Both.
Does he attach the jealousy to ending the Lord Ruler?
Yeah, he said it was me that like.
Oh yeah,
that was leading the Ska rebellion entirely.
It is jealousy. It's totally jealousy. Yeah,
but then as far as Mare goes, like I think we brought it up in one of the first episodes about like a possible love triangle between them. I had thought that maybe it was Mare and Marsh that were married, and Kelsier was kind of on the outside looking in, or it was like a sibling relationship. There was some sort of.
You originally leaned sibling, and then you eventually connected relationship dots. Yeah,
because there was the comment on their first meeting, something along the lines of "I loved her too." I think.
Yeah. Yes.
Something like that. So it was out in the open that they were both affectionate. I don't know. There was a question there, but it's kind of funny to see that more fleshed out specifically here. Yeah. Yeah. It's a whole lot of feelings. It's jealousy. It's regret for like quitting a month before the rebellion actually succeeded. All kinds of just sad boy emotions that are coming through.
Yeah, very, very saddest boy emotions. And especially because these feelings are coming flooding back, and the sense of helplessness, I think specifically he cites as being like, damn you, Kelsier, like I felt helpless then and I feel helpless now. And that's why all of this is kind of circling around in him, which is so unfortunate, because like Marsh was kind of an angry man before, like a little bit, like he was upset mostly at his brother, like that's most of where that kind of came from. And in general, he was a pretty good dude, especially teaching Vin. And now to see him like have crumbled this far is ouchy.
Ouch. Like I wish he would have died.
He does too. Like, yeah, that's true. For everyone's sake, like it would have been a little bit of a better turn. Yeah. Marsh reminds us, of course, right to end this week, the only thing that Ruin can't touch or see is inside a man's mind. And I find that fascinating. So Marsh makes a plan. He might be able to strike if he just sits still long enough and doesn't struggle against Ruin for a very long time. And then he might be able to do something.
Well, I guess his thought process, his idea is to just kind of remain still and go unnoticed until it would be most destructive to take himself out of the battle. Mm-hmm. Right? Like that's his plan, is to let Ruin create this plan around his existence and then take it away from him. I don't think that's going to work, man. I think the more he gives up struggling, the harder it is going to be for him to struggle and oppose him later. Like it's just going to have a tighter and tighter grip on him, even if he's not actually doing anything. Like that's my guess. It's not based on anything, but the fact that he's had such a terrible time of it so far that I can't imagine things getting better for him at this point. And by better, I mean fucking killing himself.
Marsh in the no good, very bad 4 years, but the really bad last year.
Yeah.
He's struggling. It's clear. And he wishes, and part of why I think I agree with your sentiment a little bit, and I think you have a little bit more support than you're giving it, is the kind of context that is he enjoys it when Ruin is occupying his mind and occupying his body, because then the destruction looks beautiful, because then the ash falling looks beautiful, and he isn't tolerating this painful existence that he doesn't want and doing these vile things that he has to see himself do, so I think you're right. I think that solidifies his grip quite a bit, or at the very least in an emotional context. So.
But at the same time, he says something along the lines of Ruin not paying attention to him or not noticing him as long as he doesn't move a finger. Mm-hmm. So maybe he's just kind of able to stay outside of any sort of attention. Maybe that's his plan, stay still their site is based on motion, something like that. I don't know. I don't know what the plan is.
Oh man, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's really funny. Okay. All right. Cool. Well, that's it for this week in terms of kind of the book and the content. Next week, we are going to start part 2, Cloth and Glass. Generally, we would do PJ's predictions here. I think I don't want to pay anything off when we don't have a drink, because that's kind of it's kind of the point, is to bet things. But there are a couple that have been answered here. I didn't specifically look through, but I know that we've talked about some of these things a couple of times.
We'll go through all of them next week.
Yeah. So with that, next week, we are going to be reading chapters 14 through 20. So 14 through 20 up until kind of that 21 barrier. So about the same length, about the same show. So that's where we'll leave you for the week.
Thank you, as ever, to Tim and Andrew for helping us keep our show's lights on. You can check out the links to our show notes. You can find our schedule, Patreon, previous episodes, websites, all in one very convenient location.
Yes. And we also want to take a second today to thank our new barbacks, Ragnar L. Thor and Siri. Thank you very much for the support. It really means a lot to us to have you all on board, and to have you both join this month was awesome. It was in the same day, I think, which is cool. Like it was just funny because it all happened within like 24 hours. We had like 3 people join the server, including Ben from HowlerPod and whatnot. So I'm very excited. We've got a lot of new things coming over the course of the next week or so. We talked about it in our little Devil's Cut, but next week, Tales of Kana will officially be releasing on June 8th, episode 1 and 2. So very exciting there. You can get all of that exciting information from us about all of the shows variously shared on Words Whiskey Pod on Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, Facebook. You can also email us any questions or commentary or anything like that at wordsandwhiskeyshow@gmail.com. And if you have any thoughts like that, you should leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts, as long as they've got that little review. Makes a world of difference in the recommendations. I know we pitch this every once in a while, hardcore, but there's my hardcore pitch. You can also find us on patreon.com/wordsandwhiskey, and you can get t-shirts on TeePublic. Follow our link inside of our and other things, t-shirts, stickers, bags, little cute onesies. We have someone who bought a onesie and it's adorable. Very jealous. It's very cool. So
yeah, that was fun to see.
Thank you all. Yeah, it was so cool. Trying to think of anything else. If there's anything else fancy. I feel like that's it.
Yeah, for now. More announcements to come.
Oh,
lots of things.
There was
that
one
we're
thing.
Working on.
There's a giveaway going on. Make sure that you enter the giveaway. Yeah. Make sure that you enter the giveaway on Instagram or Facebook. Either way, very, very easy to enter. Just go over to our Instagram page, check it out. Elantris hardcover giveaway, or not hardcover, leatherbound giveaway.
Yes. Beautiful book.
Beautiful book. Very pretty. Cool. We'll see you next week.
Bye.